Welcome to my channel, Let's Summarize It. My name is Hussam Al-Damin. I am an Associate Professor of Accounting, and today I'm going to talk to you about a paper that was published in the Journal of Business Research entitled The Future of Business Education, a Commentary in the Shadow of COVID-19 Pandemic. This was published in 2020 by Krishnamurthy. The paper focuses on how the business school should change as a reflection to changes that have taken place in the business world as a result of the pandemic. So the author begins by stating that industries such as airline, hospitality, and retail, they have all been impacted immediately. And we know that students in the business school, some of them aim to be in those industries in the future. So their career paths will be impacted. So as a result, business schools should actually take a look at its model and see how it can change so that it can stay up with the times. Now, the paper began with a survey that was conducted by Inside Higher Education, which focused on presidents of universities and colleges, or chief executives, let's call them. Now, the results of that survey showed three things. Number one, that presidents or leaders of these institutions felt that mental health for students and employees was of a paramount importance to them. Number two, they were very apprehensive about the financial costs and the attrition rates that are related to students. Number three, of course, they were interested and very concerned about employees' physical health. People could be impacted by the virus. How, will they get ill? Will they recover, etc. Now, the paper also goes on to say that there are three things that need to be considered when you're talking about transforming any business school. The first is the university. Second is the business world, and then third are students. Those three things have to be taken into account. However, they did mention that there are some moderating factors that need to be considered. One, the existing infrastructure for IT in any business school, and then second, the financial and the budgets that are associated with that business school. We'll talk more about those moderating factors at the end. Now, the paper goes on to cite a study that was published in 2011 by Norris and Lafrere. They focused on the following things. They said that if you want to change the way that you teach at a business school, you've got to do the following. You've got to first reimagine teaching, learning, and assessment. They've got to be re-evaluated separately from each other, and then of course you bundle them back together at the end. The second thing is that there has to be more emphasis placed on value, not just the quality of education. So what this means is that, yes, maybe students receive quality education, but what's the value of that education once they finish? Number three, they also mentioned, this is Norris and Lafrere in 2011, they focused on the roles of faculty members and mentors, that they must change in order for the business school to change. Finally, business schools must readdress their models by looking at new opportunities to earn income, lowering their overhead. Now we're talking about operational costs for them in terms of things that were associated with the face-to-face education. Now that's going to change. Obviously, you have to reassess that. And then finally, looking at the goals that students are trying to achieve and making sure that you assist students in achieving those goals. The first thing, when we're talking about how the university will change, number one, the author of the paper focuses on something called the algorithm as a professor, which is really interesting, because what they're saying here is that students in the future, near future, will be interacting with an algorithm instead of a teacher. That algorithm will try to personalize the student's learning experience. Now, of course, there has to be some interaction with a person at some point, but the algorithm decides at what point the students get to that particular stage. After they go through all of the learning stages with them, once students have particular questions that need to be answered by a person, that's when the algorithm sends them to an instructor. The second thing that the author focuses on when they say that university is an important thing to consider is that university is a service. They say that universities will perhaps provide something different in the future than compared to what they've been providing in the past, which is a personalized continuing education experience. So In the past, learning was through a stretch of a 4-year period, but students in the future will need continuous updating of that information, and they say that universities might come and they fill in that gap of providing that continuous education for students. Another thing that was really important is that as we move more and more towards AI, artificial intelligence, there is one thing that universities always will have the strength in, which is the assessment. So universities will always be assessment powerhouses. This is what the paper suggests, which means that we can obtain learning from multiple sources, information from various pathways. However, when it comes to assessing, this is where universities will always serve a greater purpose. The paper also focuses on the various ways that students can learn. Students will engage with chatbots, animation, videos, virtual or augmented reality, and of course in-person instruction. So universities will use data, big data perhaps, to find out exactly the best way that students learn in order for them to personalize these students' experiences when it comes to learning. Also, there's something that is really important, which is problem solving through ethical inquiry. So what they're saying here in this paper is that yes, we will perhaps rely more and more on algorithms and artificial intelligence, but at the end, students will continue to have to make ethical decisions based on that information. So universities will need to understand how that interface is going to be between algorithms and AI, and of course, and having students make ethical decisions based on the information provided to them by those different assistant means. So in terms of transformation in the business world, they did mention that healthcare will always be, from this point onwards, something that will be present in the business world. So they provide examples of retail or any place where they're saying that customers or consumers will place great value on hygiene in those places, the hygiene environment. So what we're saying here is that the business school would need to incorporate healthcare components into its curricula, because healthcare will always be a part of the business world from this point onwards. The second thing that they mentioned is that the way that employees are working now is something that needs to be studied and addressed. So for example, employees, once they had to do teleworking or working from home, they had difficulties at the beginning. However, with time, their productivity increased significantly to match what they were at the levels prior to the pandemic. So students need to be prepared to understand this new environment, because they might need to work in that environment once they finish their university degree. The other thing that was important was the disruption in the supply chain that resulted from the pandemic. This actually caught the attention of business, so businesses now are placing great emphasis on supply chain management. So this paper is saying that this particular component, supply chain management, needs to be incorporated in the curriculum and needs to be addressed in a more thorough way throughout the students' education at the university. Also, they say that there's going to be alternative investments. So businesses that were impacted had to go to different places to invest. So for example, fintech is something that is really important for students to understand. So therefore, that has to be included in the curriculum for them as well. There's also transformation when it comes to the students. So students have been affected by the COVID experience, obviously. So current and future students will start reassessing the value of their education. So they will be asking questions such as, is it worth it for me to go to the university? So we need to understand exactly how, as business schools, how do we address the needs of those students in order for us to continue to be relevant. There's also a virtual global education that has now taken place as a result of the pandemic. So students now could study at any university from their own place, from their own country. So there's no need to travel, no need to have travel expenses, no need to obtain visas. So this has to be taken into account once we look at the competition that perhaps was not present before but is present now. Of course, there's also importance that needs to be placed on the students' mental health. We have to understand how this pandemic has impacted them so that we can improve the way that they learn and the way they deal with stress in the future. Of course, AI will be used by universities not only for learning, but also to help students plan for their careers, which means that we have to make sure that we understand this technology and make sure that we stay up to par with other universities that will be using this technology in the future. Now, there are two moderators that need to be taken into account whenever we're talking about changing the business model, or talking about restructuring the way that businesses or business schools operate. The first thing is the existing or the upcoming, let's say, IT infrastructure. So business schools do not operate independent of the university, so whatever infrastructure is there already is going to be benefiting the business school and others. So if you're in a university that does not have that IT infrastructure, the internet speed, the different applications, all the different training and professional development that is available, then you're going to be at a disadvantage. The second thing that needs to be taken into account are the budget cuts and the lowered enrollment. So if you're in a place where you are not expecting budgets to increase in the near future, and also your main source of revenue is going to be impacted, then really you're going to be at a huge disadvantage when you're thinking about remodeling the business school and looking at that transformation. They conclude by saying that you need three things. You need instructional continuity, which is something that business schools have offered so far. However, it's been within the realm of remote learning, not proper online learning. The second thing is that business schools need to need to take more advantage of instructional designers so that the way that they deliver the content to students actually is something that is relevant and something that is different from this converted version of the face-to-face that's done online. And finally, we need to make sure that we start investing in AI, artificial intelligence, so that we actually stay up with the times and make sure that we give our students information that is relevant to them.